Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is one of my most anticipated of the year because it is the release date of a brand new Stephen King book, You Like It Darker, a collection of short stories. Constant readers, we are getting fed today. Happy book birthday to us. Now normally for my Stephen King new release reading vlogs, I do take y'all to Barnes & Noble with me and we pick up a copy of the book to read. However, I saw that Stephen King at least narrates a portion of this audiobook. So I am going to be listening to this one via audiobook. I will be picking up a physical copy of this book on a later date, but I did pre-order the audiobook edition of You Like It Darker. I really enjoy this cover. How do y'all feel about the cover? Because at first I was like, okay, it's fine. It's a little bland. And then I saw the alligator or the crocodile. I don't know which one, but I saw the creature that is taking up the island and then on the back as well. So it's grown on me. It's definitely grown on me, but we'll be using a graphic when we talk about it throughout this vlog because I did order the audiobook and that is going to be how we're going to listen to this book today. I am so excited. Stephen King is my favorite author. He's what got me into horror. I suspect many horror fans have the same kind of origin story as you pick up a Stephen King book way too young and then you're hooked for life. So I'm really excited to dive into this book. I have it downloaded. I'm so excited to pick it up. I just wanted to come on and give my introduction for this vlog first. The audiobook is 20 hours and 12 minutes long. There is just something so fun about getting a new release and just reading it from cover to cover when it first comes out. I used to do that all the time as a kid. You know, unfortunately, I have less free time now than I did when I was a kid, especially in the summer with no other real priorities like work or boring things like that. But 20 hours, I think we can get it done in a couple of days. I definitely don't want to rush through this one, but I also am just so excited to dive into this. I'm excited for a short story collection. I have a really good feeling about this one. I ended up loving Holly a lot more than I anticipated, but I am excited to get a book that's kind of moving away from like the Mr. Mercedes and the Holliness of it all. Like, I do enjoy her as a character, but I'm excited to get a short story collection that's just not related to that universe at all. So I say that, of course, maybe there's one in here. I have actually heard that there is a kind of sequel to Cujo in this, so I'm intrigued. There are 12 short stories in this collection, so I'll give a reading update every couple stories or so, but I can't wait. But that is going to be it for this introduction. I am so excited to shut this camera off and dive into You Like It Darker, so that is what we're going to do. I'm gonna go get to reading and I will check back in later with another reading update. Okay, so I have now read the first 3 stories in You Like It Darker, Two Talented Bastards, The Fifth Step, and Willie the Weirdo. My favorite of the 3 has got to be Two Talented Bastards. I just think, first of all, that one I would say is the least horror of all 3 of these stories. I just thought that this one was such a strong and emotional story. It's a little sad. I wouldn't necessarily call it horror. I'd maybe slot it in more like sci-fi or something like that. I don't know, but trigger trigger warning if you've recently lost a parent, especially like a father figure or something like that. In particular, the first story might be really difficult for you because it does deal with a son who has lost his father and he's getting his father's things in order. So just know that, although this does seem to be a theme of this collection, is the ending of things, whether that be death or just the ending of something else. So keep that in mind. I think that's just going to be a really heavy theme throughout this story collection, but the first one was just so emotionally impactful. It was also the longest of this three. The second two stories I think were like 15 minutes and 20 minutes on the audiobook respectively, where this one I think was about 2 hours. But I just really loved it. I loved what it had to say about like the artistic process and having something within you that you want to release out into the world, and then also just the emotional beats like really got to me. Even though it was just a short story, we didn't have a lot of time with the characters, just the relationships between, you know, an elderly couple where one dies before the other, and seeing like your childhood friends dying around you when you grow to be older, and just taking care of a parent, and that kind of reversal of roles when, you know, you were a child, your parent took care of you, and then towards the end of a parent's life you take care of your parent. So I thought that one was really, really good. The fifth step was enjoyable, particularly on audiobook, because I think I would have raced through it more because I am a faster physical reader than an audiobook reader. So I know I would have read it a lot faster physically, but I liked having to sit there and listen to this eerie conversation, because this one is about a man who is approached by a stranger and they sit on a park bench together and have a conversation. And I enjoyed sitting there knowing something was going to happen and just listening to the conversation and the tone of the conversation changing, and the sense of dread with that one was good. And then Willie the Weirdo, I didn't know where this story was going for most of it. Like I really didn't know, so I think it was my least favorite of the three, but the ending was really strong. And then like after reading the ending, you can sit with it and be like, okay, I understand like what everything, like what is being done here in terms of the story. So yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. There definitely wasn't one that I hated, but by far Two Talented Bastards was my favorite. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of butchering the name of that short story because I do not have a Maine accent, and it is spelled B-A-S-T-I-D-S. Another thing that I like about listening to a Stephen King story is the Maine of it all. Like the audiobook production adds a lot more to the characters and the setting, because it's definitely not an accent that I can hear in my mind really easily, but it's one where I'm listening to someone give me that accent in terms of the story, and I just, yeah, I really enjoyed it. But yeah, a strong start to the collection. I'm moving on to the next story, which is Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. Cannot wait. I will check back in with y'all when I finish the next 3 stories in this collection. Hey friends, happy weekend. I have read another 4 short stories in You Like It Darker. I read Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, Finn on Slide In Road, and Red Screen. I was initially going to read just 3, but I was craving reading another one, and Red Screen is a very short story, so I ended up reading 4. This batch of short stories overall is even stronger than the first 3, I'd have to say. I really enjoyed them, and the cover promise of You Like It Darker, implying that these are going to be very dark, horrific stories, absolutely rings true for the books, the short stories in this second portion of this book. But overall, there was not one that I didn't like, but I think my favorite has to be by far Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream. This one was just so good. This one also, I think, is one of the longer stories in the short story collection, and and it felt like King could have made this a book. I think the length was good. I do think another author would have published this as like a novella, like on its own, because it's that strong. I like that it's in this collection, but I'd say, you know, how Elevation was released on its own, I think this one has more of an argument to be released on its own, because take for example Elevation by Stephen King, that was published on its own, and while I enjoyed it, I felt like that one could have very easily been put into a short story collection, whereas this one, I'm glad it's in a short story collection, but this one I could see more merit for it being published on its own because it was very strong. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed listening to this one on audiobook. There are some like little effects done in the production that really impacted my reading, and just it was so suspenseful. This one actually took me a little bit longer to read than I was anticipating because it was so good, but the stakes were so high for a main character that like I was just so nervous for him, and it made me physically sick, like to my stomach, reading about some of the things that he was experiencing. So this one is about Danny's bad dream, and he has this very realistic bad dream, and it's following the dream, what happens when you wake up and realize that the dream has consequences on your real life. And this one was really scary for me because it has to deal with, without giving too much away, it has to deal with like corruption in the police force, in a certain police force, just with certain officers, and that is something that is very scary because it can happen, and it does happen, and the ways in which this detective is trying to get information out of Danny and trying to get him to confess to a crime that he has not committed is terrifying because, for example, I live in Arkansas, the West Memphis 3, like that's a big case where very similar things happened and similar things continue to happen. This one was very scary because a lot of it, I mean, there are some supernatural paranormal elements, but a lot of it was very rooted in reality, which made it really realistically scary for me. And then the next one was Finn. I think out of these four, this one was my personal least favorite, but still a good time. This one in particular, I've noticed that the endings of these short stories I think are really good. I know Stephen King is very infamous for maybe not sticking the landing every single time, but in this collection I feel like the endings are very interesting, and overall they're really well done. Can you tell that I'm really loving this collection? The next story is on Slide In Road, and this one could have been a whole book. This one could have been a whole book. This one, I will say, I know I just mentioned the endings being good. This one felt like the most like it just ended. Not necessarily because of like the action, because there was another way, I felt like another place in this short story where it could have ended, and it kept on going just like a teeny bit longer where that it just all of a sudden ended. This is about a family who is taking a car trip to Derry. They take a shortcut on a road and something goes very wrong. I forgot to mention what Finn is about. It's about a boy named Finn who has very unfortunate luck, and he gets into a very crazy situation because of how unlucky he is. On Slide In Road, I felt like did such a wonderful job with the characterization in particular. Like, this is a short story. We don't get a lot of time with these characters, but from like page 1, there are very actualized characters. Like we have Grandpop and the two parents and the two children, and they all feel very fleshed out and very like realistic, which is really impressive to do by having such fleshed out realistic characters in such a short amount of page time. So I really enjoyed that one. That one also was like, you know, everything is really great and it's just a fun little family road trip with the very realistic, you know, like, are we there yet? And smaller disturbances, and then something big happens and the story takes off from there. And then Red Screen was very short, very sweet, very nasty, in a good way, like a horror short story collection way. I thought this one was just really effective for some of the other stories in here had been a little bit on the longer side, so getting one where, again, the audiobook is about 20 minutes, so definitely less than 50 pages. So I really enjoyed this one. It's about a police officer and he's interrogating someone, and their alibi and why they did the crime that they did is a little bit out of this world, so I really enjoyed that one as well. I'm really pleasantly surprised that there have been no stories that I've absolutely like hated or it was a slog to get through. So yeah, the next update is going to include The Turbulence Expert, which is actually a short story that I've read before. I know this is a compilation of previously released and unreleased. I believe more of them are unreleased, and the other ones I feel like were a little bit harder to get because a lot of them were either, I think, audio or digital exclusives, which I like that they're now in one collection. This one I've actually read, but I actually didn't love the collection it was in. It was an anthology. It had a bunch of different authors in it, and I read it some time ago, but I think I remember liking The Turbulence Expert, and Stephen King narrates this one, so I'm looking forward to reading that one, and I will check back in with another update once I have finished another 3 or more short stories. Hey friends, as you can see, I touched up my hair a little bit this holiday weekend, but I also got a lot of good reading in. So, you know, it was a long process of the bleaching and the dyeing, and my partner helps me with it, and we usually put on just like some movies that we've seen many times and have a little movie marathon, hair dye, salon type of moment. So yeah, the hair is new, and I have finished the next 3 short stories in the Stephen King collection, and I'm here to talk to y'all about them. So first of all, The Turbulence Expert is the only one out of these stories, of the previously released stories, that I have read before. And you know, it was okay, and I didn't end up loving the collection as a whole. I believe it was called Flight or Fright. I ended up DNFing that collection after reading basically, I think, Stephen King, and I wonder if, is that the one with Joe Hill? There were a couple authors that I was excited about that collection, and I read some of it, but just I really didn't love the entire concept of the book. So all of that to say, even though there are multiple short stories in this collection that have previously been published in one format or another, The Turbulence Expert is the only one that I've read before, and I read it physically, and in this collection it was read by Stephen King, which is fun. I always love reading his narration. I think he does a really good job of reading his audiobooks. Like in particular, I think Needful Things, while not one of my favorite Stephen King stories, like it was one of my favorite Stephen King like audio experiences because he narrates it. So it was okay. I think it was probably the least strong of this whole entire collection for me, and I don't know if it's because I went into it with the preconception that I had already like DNF'd the collection it originally came from, or just, you know, it wasn't as strong as the other ones for me. This is about flying in turbulence, and honestly, if you're looking for a Stephen King short story that has to deal with flying and is, in my opinion, a lot stronger and scarier, I would highly recommend The Langoliers. That audiobook is read by Willem Dafoe, so that's an intriguing audiobook listening experience as well, but this one was okay. It just, you know, wasn't my favorite or anything. The next one, Lori, was also read by Stephen King, and this is about a man and his dog, and he gets this dog after his wife passes away, and they're growing to have like a very tenuous relationship that, you know, turns into like such a sweet bond. I think there was a meme going around like a few years ago. I mean, it's really one of those evergreen memes that I see all the time, but it's like there's no bond as beautiful as the bond between the family patriarch and the dog that he claims he didn't want. It's definitely like a very heartwarming trope. I would even say, you know, my own dad and my own grandfather, they both have dogs who they, you know, spoil rotten in their own ways when they originally were both like no dogs for the family home. So this one was really fun and heartwarming to read. This one also has some intense, scary moments, but a little bit of a spoiler, because I know a lot of people will, if they have any inclination of a dog in a horror book, they might steer away from it because they're worried about the dog. So skip forward like 30 seconds, or I'll actually stop talking and flash the answer on the screen. So if you're worried about that, you can know the answer, and if you're not, just look away for a second and look back when I start talking. So does the dog die in this story? Okay, so yeah, I enjoyed this one. It was very heartwarming and sweet, and it had some elements of scare in it. Definitely, I don't think like one of my favorite stories in this collection, but I thought it was strong. And then that leads us up into Rattlesnakes, and this is the one that I feel like has been getting a ton of buzz because it is the, I wouldn't say long awaited because I don't think any of us really thought we'd be getting a sequel to this, but this is the sequel of Cujo. I was a little skeptical going into this one. I don't really think that Cujo needed a sequel, and honestly I thought that way about The Shining as well. And then I read Dr. Sleep, and that and its movie adaptation, it's like some of my favorite Stephen King content. So, you know, I went into this one being like, okay, we don't need a sequel, but I'm curious to see, especially if you know how Cujo ends, like what this could be about in terms of the series. So Rattlesnakes takes place in present day. We are following the patriarch of the family in Cujo, and he has relocated to Florida to kind of weather out the storm of the COVID-19 pandemic in his friend's Florida McMansion. It's like a very small gated community, and it's really quiet and peaceful, and he'll have space to just kind of relax and be on his own and be safe during COVID. I know a lot of people really hate books and media that like takes place during COVID. I will say this one does not have a lot to do with like pandemic horror or anything like that. It does take place in 2020, but honestly, the only time that COVID is mentioned is because it's why he's staying at this place, and it's why he can't just leave when creepy things start to happen. So I think if you're like very COVID wary of books that use COVID or take place during COVID times, it's not like an oppressive ongoing discussion in this short story. It's just a way for the character to feel isolated in a space and feel like they can't leave the space, which is totally fine. For me, it really added to an effective haunted house story. So it's kind of a haunted house story, it's kind of a haunted object story, and it's also about how grief haunts you both, you know, physically and literally and metaphorically, like all of the ways it haunts you. So I thought this was good. I didn't think Cujo needed a sequel, and I don't think like, it's not like Rabid Dog Part 2, okay? It's very different. It just follows one of the characters that was honestly kind of a minor character in Cujo because, you know, we're mostly following the mother and son when they are being attacked by this dog. Like the father's not really in the picture, and now we kind of get him as the main character as he's still struggling with the loss of his son Tad. And this happened, you know, decades and decades ago, but grief, especially grief of a very tragic event like that, never really leaves you. So I enjoyed this one. This one was very creepy. It had some very creepy moments. It also, you know, this one I maybe wouldn't read it if you haven't read Cujo because Cujo, like it obviously spoils the ending of Cujo, but if you have no interest in Cujo, which I know, like I already mentioned about dogs, a lot of people avoid dog related horror. I totally get that if it's a trigger for you. So you definitely can go into this one like just knowing the basis of what Cujo is about and then reading up on this. I also want to say perhaps it spoils a bit of Domini. I actually haven't read Domini before. I want to read it this summer because I have heard it's a very summery book, so that'll probably be on my TBR for this summer. But I feel like it has to have kind of spoiled something that happened in Domini because Domini is mentioned along with some events. So anyway, if you haven't read those and you're like a Stephen King / spoilers purist and you want to read them in chronological order, then I'd say definitely avoid this short story, but I enjoyed it. And I will mention both this one and Lori and I think a couple other ones. They're very much focused in like Florida. This feels like a very summery collection. I think the first short story in this collection took place in Maine. The other ones, either there's not like a location mentioned or they've been in Florida, or I think Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream was in not Arkansas, but like around like that southern region. Like not a lot of them are taking place in Maine. So this is a very summer centric collection, which I think is interesting because Stephen King is known for like representing rural coastal Maine life. And that's like something a lot of people are drawn to in his stories. And these don't really have that Maine feel, but this is a really good like summer vibes themed collection, especially the last two, Lori and Rattlesnakes, take place in Florida. You can feel the heat. It's their great summer horror, so definitely wanted to note that. And I do think that Stephen King himself does spend time like living in Florida half the year and then in Maine half the year as well, something like that. I know he doesn't spend all of his time in Maine anymore, so that definitely makes sense that when you live in a different location, your stories will start to reflect that. So yeah, out of the last three stories that I read, my favorite was Rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes. I think it landed the emotional impact. It was a sequel that wasn't like, it didn't feel like a cash grab. It just felt like really building upon and utilizing a character from a previous story and exploring him. And I thought that also helped with the world building of a short story, because you already kind of know this character's background and who he is as a character, at least in his past, and some events that really shaped him as a person. So I think that added to the character development. Definitely Rattlesnakes was my favorite in these last three, but I only have two more short stories in this collection, The Dreamers and The Answer Man. So I'm going to read those today and then I'll wrap up the collection for y'all. But yeah, so far this is a great summary collection and I cannot wait to finish it. And just like that, I have finished the last two stories in this collection, The Dreamers and The Answer Man, and we are now finished with You Like It Darker. So this collection, I think, really ended on a high note. The Dreamers ended up being just okay for me. We follow our main character who comes back from Vietnam, feels very disillusioned. He finds a job as a stenographer and he gets offered a job to take notes for a very eclectic employer. And this employer is doing some experiments involving dreams and dreamers, and things go very strange. I was really intrigued about the premise of this one and the actual dream aspect, but I feel like once we reach like the climax and the conclusion of this one, it just didn't pan out the way that I was like interested in, if that makes sense. Like I really thought this one had a lot of potential. I feel like this is another one that very easily could have been a full-length novel, or maybe not like a Stephen King full-length novel of like 500 pages, but perhaps 300 pages or so. So I enjoyed the concept. Just the execution just felt a little flat for me, as I felt like the ramp up to the climax was a lot creepier than what ended up actually happening. But this collection ended with my favorite story of the collection, which was The Answer Man. And this one just feels very classic Stephen King in terms of the magical, mystical setup that integrates with just everyday life. We follow our main character as he meets the Answer Man 3 different times in his life at 3 very integral moments. And the Answer Man's premise is that he'll answer any question. There are some rules, of course, and by the first meeting, our main character realizes that the Answer Man does indeed give correct answers to things he couldn't possibly know about. And we follow our main character through his entire life, pretty much, from when he's a young man just graduating college to the very end of his life. And this was just so beautiful. This was so beautiful and so creepy and sad and scary. And this one blended like the supernatural elements really well with, you know, I don't want to call it mundane, but mundane realistic terrors that perhaps a lot more people can experience, right? Like we're not all going to experience a haunted house or a demon or a mystical figure that appears on the side of the road, but we will all experience loss and tragedy, and just exploring the combination of the two, and how King focuses on both the mundane and the supernatural with just the same care and love. And this story was just Stephen King at his absolute best. I absolutely loved it. I got a little emotional towards the end. This is definitely one that packs that emotional punch. It has that creepy element, but it also has really tender and heartwarming moments and bittersweet and sad moments as well. So by far my favorite. It was really well done. In the acknowledgements, King actually mentions that the first couple pages or so of The Answer Man he had written like in his 30s, and he just put it in a box, shelved it, put it away, and I believe his nephew, I think he said, his nephew found it, pulled it out, read it, and said, this is a really good story, you should expand upon this, and he did expand upon it like recently. So it took him a very long time to write, and I think that adds a little bit more to the richness and the realness of the story, because our character, the first time he meets the Answer Man, he's fresh out of college. The second time he meets the Answer Man, he's more middle-aged, and then of course the last time he meets the Answer Man, he's closer to the end of his life. So I just thought that nuance it just really worked really beautifully, and by far it was my favorite story out of this entire collection. But yeah, overall this was an absolutely incredible collection. I really loved it, and I loved it in a way that I wasn't anticipating with a short story collection, because I think when I compare it to a collection like Everything's Eventual, that is a collection where there are some stories, and I read this quite some years ago now, there are some stories that still stick with me to this day, I still think about on a pretty frequent basis, and like were genuinely scary, and I loved them. But there were other stories in that collection where I just thought they were okay, or I didn't like them, I flat out just didn't like them, didn't see the point of them, didn't enjoy them. So that's like typically the case for me in terms of short story collections. I mean, every single one I feel like have had like its ups and downs, even like different seasons, which is a very iconic Stephen King collection. It was an uneven reading experience for me because I didn't love every single book in that short story collection, but this one, there are none that I would say I didn't like or didn't work for me. There were some where I felt like could have been expanded upon or improved. I think The Dreamers is a really good example of that one, where it's definitely not one of my favorite stories in the collection, but I enjoyed it overall. Like, I still think it's a really strong story, so definitely I think this is probably one of King's strongest collections. Like I've mentioned a couple of times in this video, some of the stories have been previously published, and a lot of those were only previously published in like ebook format. In particular, Finn was, I believe, a Scribd exclusive, Red Screen was in an ebook bundle, and Lori was a free download from stephenking.com. So all of those, like in particular, because it's pretty easy for me at least to find audiobooks and to go looking for audiobooks. Like I have the Libby app, I do use other audiobook apps occasionally, but like Libby for my library is a pretty easy way to find audiobooks, and you can easily find physical books as well, because you just go to a bookstore, go to your library, request them. Ebooks I find are a little bit harder to track down, like ebook exclusives, especially if you don't have an ebook reader and you're not interested in purchasing ebooks. So I'm really glad that these short stories were put in this collection, and that they're a little bit easier to find and locate for people, because they were some strong stories. And I'm glad that putting them in this short story collection makes them just even more accessible, because now there's an audiobook, there's an ebook that you can check out from your library, there's a physical copy of the book. So I'm really glad that these stories were included. And it is worth pointing out that the stories that were new, that were not previously published, were my favorites. And it's funny because like the book ends, and then like one of the middle stories ended up being my three favorites. My three favorites were obviously The Answer Man, which concludes this collection, Two Talented Bastards, which was the first story in this collection, and then Danny Coughlin's Bad Dream, which was one of the middle stories. I just thought this collection was really good. It was a little less main-centric than I was anticipating, and I do think that that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed listening to Two Talented Bastards so much, because that felt very classic King, small town Maine. But you know, change in setting is always good. I thought this was really strong writing, and this is a really great summer collection. So if you're looking for very summery horror, not all of them take place in the summer, but a lot of them do have like a summer vibe. This feels, if I had to pick one season, this is a summer horror collection. And if you're looking for a book for Summerween or summer reading challenges, Book by the Pool. Book by the Pool. If you're going to the ocean or having a water-themed vacation, this might be a fun one to bring along if you like a creepier beach read. But yeah, overall, really impressed with this collection. I definitely think out of the ones that I have read that it's the strongest, my favorite Stephen King short story collection, and I've read pretty much all of them except for Nightmares and Dreamscapes and Night Shift at this point. So I definitely think this is great. He's the king of storytelling. So yes, if it wasn't obvious already from the tone of this entire vlog, I would recommend this. I would recommend this both for constant readers and for people new to Stephen King, honestly. I think if you pick up this collection as your first Stephen King, it'll really showcase the best parts of his writing and the absolute gamut of just from the horrifying, the creepy, the terrifying to the sweet and beautiful and heartwarming. Like it's all in here. So You Like It Darker was definitely a hit for me. But that is going to be it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give a like, leave a comment down below, keep it respectful. I know my Stephen King videos get a lot more traction than my normal videos, so just keep it civil in the comments down below. No horror gatekeeping or anything like that. If you didn't enjoy the collection, I mean, of course you can leave your opinions down below, but definitely, as always, keep it civil. If you would like to see another Stephen King reading vlog, let me know. Let me know what books you want me to tackle. Should I tackle Night Shift, Domini? I think those could be fun ones for this summer. I was compiling like a list organizing which Stephen King books I had read and which I haven't yet, and I still have, I think, almost 20 that I haven't read. I think a little less than 20, but almost 20 books that I haven't read, so that's exciting. I could definitely make a reading vlog of a Stephen King backlist release. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for all of the bookish, horror, and cozy gaming content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!